Hey guys, welcome back to I think our third set of notes here for chapter 45. We're talking community ecology, and today we're going to talk predator-prey stuff, which is super fun. Predators and their prey, they exert selective pressures on one another. Cheetahs are fast, and Thompson's gazelles are fast. And the faster the cheetah, the faster the gazelle. The slow gazelles are eaten. The fastest cheetahs catch the most food, so you end up with two critters that are both very, very, very fast. Mutations can give prey species a special defensive adaptation. In some cases, it can be very good. And the better the defensive adaptation, then that favors predators who can respond or overcome that defensive mechanism. So some prey have a conspicuous color pattern that predators have learned to avoid. For example, wasps or bees, they kind of have that yellow-black stripe. They're very obvious. You can see their colors from a long distance off, and you know not to mess with them because they have yellow and black stripes, and the yellow and black stripes have stung you as a kid. So you don't go around swatting at bees unless you're not that sharp, then you might. Well-defended species, they share the same type of predator, and they often look like each other. So the predator learns to avoid, snakes with red and black and yellow stripes, and then it'll avoid all the snakes with red, yellow, and black stripes, whether they're venomous or not. So here's an example of mimicry. Now this is a stinging wasp who actually has a stinger, and if you bug him or try to bite him, you're going to pay for it. And so you learn that when you first snap at a wasp and try to bite him as an animal, and he tags you on the tongue, it kind of hurts. This is a beetle that is an edible mimic. He looks like a wasp coloration, but he has no stinger. He can't hurt you, but he looks like he can, so you leave him alone. Here's another beetle, black and white stripes, you leave him alone. He has no stinger. He can't actually hurt you. This one's a fly, black and white stripes. He looks dangerous, looks like a bee. He can't hurt you. He doesn't have a stinger. But because they all have those stripes, it triggers something in the brain, like, I don't want to mess with that thing. So that's called Batesian mimicry, when it's non-dangerous or non-venomous or non-poisonous, mimicking an actual poisonous one. It's called Batesian mimicry. The other one is called Müllerian mimicry. Müllerian mimicry is where dangerous and venomous guys look like each other, so that predators only have to learn this lesson once. Bees, wasps, different species of wasps have yellow and black stripes because they can sting. So you can be a poisonous mimicking a poisonous, or a dangerous mimicking a dangerous, or a non-dangerous mimicking a dangerous. And it just depends on the type of mimic you are. So camouflage is a big effect for prey avoiding predators, obviously. And camouflage is having a body shape or color that allows the individual to blend into its surroundings. Your book has really cool pictures on page 807 of mantis, hiding in flowers, and birds who put their heads straight up and sway with the reeds, that kind of stuff. Certainly octopus can change their colors to blend in. That sort of stuff is very good. But herbivory is any time that an animal feeds on plants. And some plants have adapted to try to recover from that loss of herbivores eating them. So they just grow really fast. Other plants have traits that deter herbivores, like having spines or thorns or chemical compounds that will burn the tongues of animals trying to eat them. So another close relationship that's not predation but is similar to it is called parasitism. And a parasite feeds on a host but really doesn't kill it. The goal is not to kill the host, but in the process of making more parasites, you might inadvertently kill the host. There are lots of different parasitic things. There are bacteria, fungi, protists, parasitic invertebrates like little roundworms. There's even parasitic plants that use these special roots called haustoria to tap in and take the sugar and water from other plants. And there's even parasitic fish, which swim up into the gills of other fish or latch on to other fish and parasitize them. So lots of things are parasites. And if the parasite is successful and damages the host, they would of course decrease the size of that host population. Parasites have traits that allow them to locate hosts and feed undetected. For example, mosquitoes, a female mosquito, excuse me, sorry about that, a little sneeze. Female mosquitoes that feed on humans, for example, when they inject their saliva, it makes sure that the blood doesn't clot. It's an anticoagulant. Leeches have the same thing, anticoagulant saliva that lets the blood flow in and fill them up. That's kind of the idea. A lot of the things that parasitize by biting will also have some local anesthetic in their saliva, so you can't actually feel the mosquito biting you till it's too late, Another way to parasitize somebody without actually, drinking their body fluids or blood would be brood parasites, which you guys have already heard about. And those are, European cuckoos, and in North America we have cowbirds, brown-headed cowbirds, that will lay their eggs in another bird's nest and leave, and that other bird will raise their baby for them. And by not having to invest in any of that energy for parenting, allows them to produce a lot more offspring, drop them in a whole bunch of nests, and not waste any of that energy feeding their own kids. And when they do that, they decrease the reproductive rates of the host nest species that they're parasitizing. So that can be a very bad thing. This favors the adaptation to a host being able to recognize and reject brood parasites. So somewhere along the line, birds learned, hey, this egg is bigger than mine and has, doesn't have brown spots like my egg does, and I think that's a cuckoo bird egg, so they go ahead and kick it out of the nest. And over time, cuckoo birds who parasitize certain nests actually have developed eggs that are colored and shaped like the host nest they're trying to parasitize. So it's kind of that cool coevolution example again. So now there's parasitoids. Parasitoids are very cool. These are insects that aren't directly parasitizing another insect necessarily, but they lay their eggs in the bodies of other insects. It's very, very cool. And as the eggs hatch into larvae, the larvae actually eat their way out of the host and kill the host as they eat their way out. And it's very cool. And some of these we're actually using as a biological pest control, so we can infect, insects we don't want, like, aphids or something like that. If we can find, the insect that kills aphids by parasitizing them, then we can get rid of aphids. And we started the chapter with, the red fire ant example. And there's actually a fly from South America, where the fire ants are originally from, that will inject its eggs into the body of the fire ant, and the larvae or the eggs will navigate to the fire ant's head, eat their way out of the head, and the head will fall off the fire ant. So it's potential to use it as biological pest control. Get rid of the pests you don't want by finding their parasite and giving them lots of parasites. So the ideal biological control agent is finding the host species, and then their population growth rate needs to be really comparable to the host. And then the risk then is, of course, once they kill the host, what are they going to parasitize next? Are we just going to create another problem by bringing more invasive species in? That would be the question. So ecological succession occurs when a lot of different species in a community can change over time. And so when you have something like a natural disaster, like a flood or a fire or a volcano, we need to have succession going on. And the pioneer species are the first to arrive at newly vacated habitats. Most of the time they're lichens, because lichens don't need a lot. They can just grow on bare rock. But if there's enough water, moss can actually be the first to arrive. And after that, you get some hardy annual flowering plants that have wind-dispersed seeds. And primary succession is the next species is going to build on that foundation laid by the first species, and later species displace the earlier ones. So there's primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession occurs on bare rock where there's no soil, and secondary succession occurs where there is soil to start with. So bare rock is like a new volcanic island in the ocean. That's primary succession. Or a volcano where lava covered the area and there's no rock underneath. That's primary succession. Secondary succession, flood, fire, that kind of stuff. Secondary succession is a disturbed area, right? So abandoned agricultural fields or burned forests. But you start with some soil. So when you have soil, you're going to go a lot faster than with primary succession where there's no soil around. And species composition of a community can change frequently during these early stages of succession and kind of unpredictably, because random events are a really big deal when a community is in its fragile early stages. So here's secondary succession. Mount St. Helens erupted, and it didn't necessarily cover the whole place with lava and make it bare rock, but it did cover it with a lot of ash, And so when it covered it with ash, there was still soil. It was just under the ash. And so then you have to have recolonizing the area. It's succession. So species can be introduced into an area. Species can be lost from an area. And those can have huge changes on the community. And one example of this is what's called a keystone species. And a keystone species is a species that has a disproportionately large effect on a community relative to its abundance. We don't think it should be as important as it ends up being. We've watched the wolf video last chapter, so you guys have seen that example of a keystone species. Another example is a sea star in tidal pools. They did kind of a cool experiment. They just took some sea stars out of the tidal pools, which was the apex predator, and said, hey, let's see what happens to this little ecosystem with no predator. And the mussels that the sea star was eating completely took over, and the other mussels were not able to compete, and the overall species diversity was reduced. So it doesn't have to just be an apex predator like a wolf or a sea star. It can be something smaller down the line like beavers. Beavers, they cut down the trees. They create deep pools when they build a dam. Lots of species can survive in those deep pools, and they change entire ecosystems by expanding waterways and that sort of stuff. And so beavers are a keystone species as well. So after a disturbance, the species that's going to withstand or benefit from the disturbance is going to be in an advantage. For example, here in South Dakota on the prairie, almost all of the plants that grow in the mixed grass prairies of South Dakota are pretty fire tolerant. Fire is a normal part of the Black Hills and a normal part of the prairie. And most of the plants that are successful here are going to do just fine if there's a fire every few years. It's not a big deal. Some plants produce seeds that actually require fire to germinate. Other plants store resources in their roots, really deep roots, so the fire can roll over and burn the top and they can regrow quickly from a fire. But there's indicator species. And indicator species are kind of like the old kind of adage, the canary in the coal mine. You go into a coal mine, you carry a little canary with you because they're more sensitive to toxic gases than us. And when the canary you're carrying with you dies, you need to get out of there because the air is no good. And that's an indicator species, right? So an example of that is trout. If you have trout in a stream, you have a good stream because it takes cold water, and they're very sensitive to pollutants. And so you got to have a pretty good stream to have trout in it. If the trout all start dying, your stream is not that sensitive. Or rather, your stream is not very healthy, or it's getting worse if the trout are gone. And so that's an indicator species. When we introduce new species into a community, we can cause a lot of problems. And we found this out the hard way because we brought a lot of new species in. But an exotic species is a species that was a resident of established community, some other country, that became established somewhere else. The United States is currently home to at least 4,500 exotic species, and that is not good. 25% of the species in Florida, 45% of the species in Hawaii are non-native, exotic, introduced species. And they almost always have a detrimental effect on native biodiversity. There are quite a few examples here we can show you. This is a vine native to Asia. It's called kudzu vine. It's even making its way into pop culture and some music references in country music. But they introduced it in the South thinking, hey, this stuff grows fast. Animals can eat it. Man, this would be cool to bring in and to grow here and use it to feed our animals. And they released it into the American South, and now it's everywhere. This whole area here, kudzu vine, climbs up other trees, kills other trees, climbs up buildings, climbs up telephone poles, and it will just take over entire areas, and you can't get rid of it. And so that's a really bad thing for that community. Here's the gypsy moth from Europe and Asia, brought here accidentally, and it feeds on oak trees. It's very bad for our oak trees. And then this little thing, which is not actually that little, is called a nutria. And a nutria is a semi-aquatic rodent, kind of like a beaver without the benefits of a beaver, that are now all over in the Gulf states and in the Pacific Northwest. And they are very, very damaging to swamplands and to the native biodiversity. They like to dig holes to live in, and they can dig holes in levees. And you can imagine how people in Louisiana feel about a big rodent digging holes in levees. So that's a nutria, another invasive species that's very bad. So that's a few sections. That's about enough. I don't want to bore you guys too much, so we're going to go ahead and call our quits there. So as always, thanks for your time.